Good afternoon and welcome to Gonvick for this one-of-a-kind celebration planned and produced by Vance Norgard, one of Northern Pipeline's first employees. My name is Patricia Santo, the former Mrs. Noel Kuhn. Together, we founded the Northern Pipeline. I was born in Bagley, Minnesota in 1944 to the proud parents of Cora and Leander Broyne. Growing up on a farm outside of Gonvick, I had many excellent experiences. Learning the complexities of farming and helping my parents in every way I could taught me the value of ingenuity and hard work, and was also a lot of fun. When I was 10 years old, my family briefly moved to Montana for work. The Montanans were nice, but they just couldn't replace the Minnesotans in our hearts. After a short stay in Montana, we returned to Minnesota to settle in town in Gonvick, with its unmistakable hometown feel. I was happy that we moved into town because I was ready for adventure. My very first job was babysitting. I worked for Doris and Phil Allen, watching their sons Larry and Jimmy, as well as Alice and Kenneth Buckness, watching Lyle, Ron, and Mark. When I was old enough, I retired from babysitting to work after school at the Leader Record offices owned by Mr. and Mrs. Vic Alabou, then at the Gonvick Movie Theater, and finally at the Rodeo Drive-In Cafe owned by Doris and Phil Allen. The drive-in sparked something special in me. Straight after graduating from Gonvick High in 1962, I asked Doris and Phil if I could lease their drive-in. They agreed, and I headed to the Northern State Bank to get a loan for the lease and startup supplies. While I never had a doubt that I could manage the drive-in, I was surprised to find that at the end of the first month, I had made enough to pay off my loan. The bank was impressed, and my good credit with them paid off later in life. Working the drive-in was often a family affair. My mother would help me cook. My father would take care of the surprising amount of garbage, and my sister Adele would fill in wherever she was needed. I am so grateful she made time to help, even with a full-time profession at Northern State Bank. Her husband, Richard Maple, was in the Army and stationed in Germany, so perhaps the drive-in was a way for her to pass the evenings. As business grew, I employed Joanne Bagney, who later married Glenn Hansen, Linda Kern, Mrs. Larry Shellquist. Occasionally, Mitzi Norquist, daughter of Nora and George Norquist, would work for me when she came home from the cities for the weekend. It was Mitzi that covered for me when I went on my very first date with my future husband, Noel Kuhn. Noel and I met at the Rodeo Drive-In by way of his brother Coy and his family. They had been checking out the area one rainy day and stopped at my drive-in for lunch. My mother was working the grill for me while I was preparing supplies for the day. From the back, I overheard my mother in conversation with Coy's family. Coy was asking my mother if she owned the establishment, and my mother said, "No, my daughter leased it from Doris and Phil Allen, who are the owners of this property." When I came out from the back of the restaurant, Coy was in disbelief. "That little girl doesn't run this place, does she?" My mother replied, "Yes," and Coy immediately wanted to introduce me to his brother, who was working the pipeline between Thief River Falls and Plummer. About a week later, on a rainy afternoon, Noel came to the drive-in and introduced himself. We visited between my waiting on customers. He was rather soft-spoken and shy, but he was interesting. When he had time off work, I'd often see him at the drive-in. Eventually, he asked me if I would go to Jack's Supper Club in Wilton for dinner. I agreed on the condition that he would get me back by 11 o'clock p.m., since we often got a late-night rush after dances at Pine Lake let out. When Noel's job in Minnesota was complete, he left for the state of Wyoming for another job. When he was about to finish his job there, he got news that his mother in Houston had been diagnosed with cancer. Wanting to be with her, he asked me if I would marry him and head down to Texas. Never one to turn down an adventure, I said yes. With autumn turning quickly into winter, I closed up the drive-in and thanked the Allens for allowing me to lease it. With that tied up, Noel and I were married by Ben E.M. Berg and left for Houston, Texas, a few days later. After arriving in Houston, Noel took a temporary job at a fabrication shop as a welder helper until he could locate another pipeline job he was interested in. His brother Coy was also in Houston, and we found an apartment to rent a few miles away from him. This worked out well since Coy was a welder and he was building his own truck bed for his welding machine and accessories. I encouraged Noel to help his brother with the truck on weekends doing miscellaneous tasks. His brother appreciated the help, and Noel got good practice as a welder. By the time they finished with the truck, Noel could weld pretty darn good. With this experience, we began to scour pipeline magazines for jobs as a welder or welder helper. The jobs came in, but the nature of the pipeline business was very mobile. In the next year, we moved to 17 different locations. On the first move, Noel tasked me with getting everything we owned into the car. If I could do it, he promised me 2 new dresses. I succeeded in packing everything in, although to make it work, I had to put the ironing board in a way that it would smack him in the back of the head when we hit a bump. Still, I met the challenge, and he bought those dresses. Unsurprisingly, I didn't get a similar challenge again. Unfortunately, those same 2 dresses flew away on one of our later moves. In the next year, 1964, there was a shortage of welders across the nation. I encouraged Noel to try his hand at the welder's test, which he passed on his very first try. As a certified welder, we could really start saving money. I loved my time owning a business, and as our savings grew, my mind raced about the possibilities for our own business. At first, Noel was skeptical about being a business owner, but I said there was no way we were going to be moving all over the country with kids in tow. It was time to get serious about our future. He agreed, and all that was left was to figure out what kind of company we wanted to start. With Noel's experience and a bought and paid for welding rig, a company installing new pipelines and replacing old lines seemed like a pretty good choice. By this time, Noel had gained enough knowledge about the trade, and I felt I had a pretty good handle on business. For start, we knew Noel would do the welding himself, and that we could hire on employees when we grew. To start our company, I knew our best bet would be to return to northern Minnesota. First, there were a few pipelines in the area. More importantly, I knew the people around Gonvick. With their work ethic, they would make excellent employees. And finally, the credit I had gained at Northern State Bank would be a great help to getting started. It was also great to be back among family and friends. Starting the company in Gonvick gave us an opportunity and also allowed us the opportunity to provide excellent employment for the community. In 1968, we opened for business as Northern Gas Line Constructors Company. We had wanted to call it the Northern Pipeline Company, but sadly, the name was already taken. When the name Northern Pipeline Construction Company became available a few years later, we gladly took it and changed our company's name. As our business grew, Noel took the role of president, and I was the secretary and treasurer of our company. We had also started our family, our very first daughter, Stephanie Lee. Much later, we had our second daughter, Nicole Luann. A third and final daughter we named Kristen Noel. Stephanie is now married to Michael Pride, and they reside in the Twin Cities as well as in Arizona. Kristen is married to Adam Blomberg, and they live in North Carolina. Northern Pipeline was growing so fast that we needed to build 2 more shops outside of Gonvick. As we expanded, I'll always remember that Harlow and Tippy Berg, Werner and Rosie Odegaard, and my Aunt Myrtle Salem loaned Northern Pipeline Company money to keep things flowing well. A special thank you to each of them for their generosity. What great people Gonvick is made up of. Some years later, Northern moved around because we were outgrowing the banks that we had available to us. In the 1980s, Noel and I divorced, and I moved on from Northern Pipeline. The successful and profitable company was eventually purchased by Southwest Gas, located in Phoenix, Arizona. After leaving Northern Pipeline, I started my third company, a sweeping, striping, lawn, and snow service in Apple Valley, Minnesota. In the year 2000, I married my soulmate, Alfio Santo, and we now happily reside in Scottsdale, Arizona, where we are happily resting and retired. No day goes by where I don't think about the people of Gonvick. They have been my employees, customers, mentors, teachers, family, and friends. No matter where in this country I have lived, I will always consider Gonvick my hometown. I want to thank all of you for coming today and being the wonderful people that have had such an impact on my life. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, and I thank Vance for organizing this event and for helping bring this message to everyone here. I want to thank my family for their love and support through this journey. I want to thank Noel for being my partner while on the Northern Pipeline adventure. And last, I want to again thank the people of this wonderful town of Gonvick. Without you, none of this would have ever been possible. Thank you, and God bless.